Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst into the merciless cold that clutches medieval villages after sunset. You trudge into your tiny, drafty huta where the wind whistles through cracks and your breath turns into little clouds before you. The floor beneath you is stone or packed earth, numbing your toes as the chill creeps upward. You probably won't survive this night without learning some serious tricks to keep warm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so let's see who's cozy and who's shivering right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The harsh reality of medieval peasant nights is not just about cold air, it's about survival. Winters could stretch on for months, with temperatures often plunging below freezing, and homes offering little protection from the elements. You trudge through this every evening, the weight of frost and dampness settling in as night falls. Historians still argue whether these cold conditions directly caused widespread illness or if malnutrition played a bigger role, but the chill was undeniably a ruthless companion. You might expect some cozy medieval blanket or fancy insulation, but most peasants faced nights on bare floors or thin straw mattresses, shivering under patchy woolen cloaks. The average peasant house was a single room, with smoke from the fire lingering in the air but no chimney to whisk it away, so smoke and cold shared the space equally. Here's a quirky tidbit: some medieval peasants used animal dung, not exactly the Instagram-worthy heating hacket to line floors or even mix into walls for insulation. While it sounds crass, dried dung was surprisingly effective at blocking drafts. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, humans and animals back then weren't shy about putting nature to work in unexpected ways. So tonight, as you tuck yourself in or maybe reach for that blanket, remember the medieval peasants whose nights were long, cold, and unforgiving. You're in for a journey through their gritty, inventive fight against winter's worst. You settle in closer to the hearth of the glowing, crackling heart of your humble home. The fire's everything. Its orange tongues lick the cold air, pushing back darkness and despair. You can almost feel the warmth soak into your bones. For a medieval peasant, keeping the hearth alive was a sacred nightly ritual. The fire wasn't just for cooking, it was your primary defense against freezing nights. But it wasn't as simple as just lighting a match. You had to coax the embers back to life, feeding them carefully to avoid smoke choking your cramped space. The humble hearth was often just a fire pit dug into the dirt floor or a small stone-built fireplace, if you were lucky. Historians still argue whether the typical medieval peasant home had a chimney or just a hole in the roof. Evidence is mixed, and regional differences complicate the story. Without a chimney, smoke filled the room, but strangely, that haze helped repel insects and even some airborne diseases. So the fire both warmed and purified the air in its own smoky way. Now, here's a quirky nugget: some peasants used dung cakes, dry, flat patties made from animal dung, as fuel for their fires. They burned slower and hotter than wood in some cases, making them an odd but effective heat source. The idea of burning poop might make you wrinkle your nose, but when wood was scarce, it was better than freezing. Fuel was precious, so the fire was tended with care. You didn't just throw logs on willy-nilly. Each ember was a tiny treasure, rekindled each evening from the ashes left overnight. It was common to bank the fire before sleeping, covering it with ashes to keep embers alive for morning relighting. You'd wake with hope, thanks to that glowing promise beneath the gray ash. In fact, some households kept a firekeeper who guarded the embers continuously, especially during harsh winters. Imagine staying awake just to babysit a bed of glowing coals. Not exactly the dream job, but critical for survival. So, as you imagine the smoky warmth of that hearth, remember it was more than a fire, it was a lifeline against winter's bite, a flickering heart beating through the endless cold. You press your back against the cold, hard wall, but thankfully your feet rest on a soft, albeit scratchy, mattress made from straw, rushes, or reeds. These humble natural materials were the medieval peasant's secret insulation against the biting cold seeping up from the frozen ground. The crunch of dry straw under your limbs might sound uncomfortable to you, but to them, it was a luxury better than bare earth any day. Straw beds weren't just about softness, they trapped warm air close to the body, creating a thin barrier against the cold floor. You pile on thick rushes along flexible grass-like plants that not only added cushion but absorbed moisture from damp feet and bodies. It was a delicate balance between comfort and hygiene, as these materials needed frequent changing to avoid mustiness and pests. Imagine sharing the mattress with family and sometimes even animals, so there was little room for personal space in those nights. A quirky fact: some peasants stuffed their bedding with aromatic herbs like lavender or mint, hoping to ward off fleas and other pests. The scent also offered a faint comfort in otherwise dank and smoky homes. Not exactly the luxury spa treatment we imagine, but hey, at least they tried. Historians still argue whether these natural bedding materials were replaced seasonally or used year-round. Some evidence points to a more intensive bedding system during the harsh winters, while in warmer months, thinner layers sufficed. This debate reminds us that life back then was deeply adaptive, responding to the relentless rhythm of nature. Of course, the straw and rush bedding wasn't all roses literally. It attracted critters, and the risk of lice and fleas was ever present. But better to have a scratchy mattress than a frozen stone floor, right? So next time you flop onto your comfy mattress, spare a thought for those who relied on humble plants and the earth's gifts just to keep from freezing solid through the night. You tug on yet another rough, itchy woolen layer, grateful for even the smallest shield against the cold. Clothing wasn't just fashion in the medieval peasant's world, it was survival gear. Layered like an onion, you wrap yourself in linen undergarments and thick wool outerwear, trying to trap precious heat close to your body. Every rag and thread counts when frost threatens to steal your breath. Clothing was usually made from coarse wool, homespun and far from soft. You'd think it'd scratch relentlessly, but at least it kept the cold at bay. Linen, which was lighter and worn closer to the skin, absorbed sweat and helped regulate temperature. Recycling was key. Old garments were patched, turned inside out, or cut into smaller pieces to make new clothes. Fast fashion? Not in the Middle Ages. Here's a quirky insight: some peasants stuffed their clothes with dried moss or wool scraps to add insulation. Yes, padding yourself like a medieval marshmallow was a real thing. It sounds odd, but it was practical and kept the cold from creeping in. You might also find peasant children wearing oversized clothes handed down multiple times, sometimes patched so often they were more patch than fabric. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had access to multiple full sets of clothing or just one or two worn to shreds. Clothing was expensive and labor-intensive to produce, so most wore the same outfits year-round, washing infrequently and relying on layers to manage changing seasons. On colder nights, you might even wear a woolen hood or cloak, pulling it tight around your head and neck to trap heat. It's not hard to imagine that by the time you layered all these garments, moving around felt like wading through a swamp. But hey, better slow and warm than fast and frozen. So next time you complain about itchy wool socks, remember those medieval nights when a single layer could mean the difference between shivering awake and a somewhat comfortable sleep. You squeeze into the same cramped bed with your family, sharing warmth like your life depends on it, because it does. Body heat was one of the most precious commodities on cold medieval nights, and communal sleeping was both a necessity and a social norm. The more bodies packed together, the better the chances everyone survived the biting frost outside. You press close, feeling the rise and fall of another's breath, the subtle warmth radiating from their skin, a natural heater far superior to any patch of straw or wool. Kids, parents, sometimes even neighbors or travelers crowded together in one room or bed, conserving heat and comforting one another. Privacy, a luxury lost to survival. Interestingly, some peasants even slept with their animals indoors, turning cows, sheep, or pigs into living radiators. The barnyard body heat trick wasn't just folklore, it was a calculated measure. Yes, it came with risks, including disease and foul smells, but the alternative was freezing alone in silence. Historians still argue how common this practice was across different regions and seasons, but there's no doubt it was a vital warmth source. Here's a quirky aside: some peasants reportedly wore foot warmers, small heated stones wrapped in cloth tucked into their bedding or boots to stave off frostbite. Imagine carrying a mini hot rock around all night. It sounds cozy, if a bit awkward. Communal sleeping also fostered social bonds. Sharing warmth meant sharing stories, worries, even whispered jokes in the dark. In a world so cold and unforgiving, human connection was as vital as fire or straw. So, when you curl up alone tonight, remember that your medieval counterpart relied on a crowd not just for warmth but for a shared heartbeat against the winter's chill. You wake to the muffled grunts and gentle breaths of livestock nestled just a few feet away. Those barnyard animals weren't just food sources, they were living heaters, warming the air around your home and sometimes even sharing the same space. Bringing animals indoors was a double-edged sword. While their body heat helped keep the cold at bay, it came with risks you probably wouldn't want to deal with. Imagine a cow or a few sheep crowded into your humble hut, their warm bodies radiating heat through the night. This practice was surprisingly common, especially in harsher climates. The animals' presence raised indoor temperatures just enough to prevent frostbite and saved peasant families from freezing. Yet, it also introduced diseases and unpleasant odors, making breathing a smoky, dank challenge. Historians still argue about the extent and safety of this practice. Some suggest it was a last resort in extreme winters, while others believe it was standard for many rural homes. Regional differences played a role, too. In colder northern regions, barnyard animals were more likely to be stabled indoors, while in milder climates, they might stay outside with straw bedding. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants reportedly used animal skins or hides hung inside the house as additional insulation, or even as makeshift curtains to block drafts. It's like bringing the barn inside, literally and figuratively. Of course, the smell of animals, mixed with the smoke from the hearth and damp earth floors, made for a pungent aroma. Not exactly a spa treatment, but in those bitter medieval winters, comfort was measured in warmth, not scent. So as you enjoy your fresh, odor-free air tonight, spare a thought for those who shared their beds, hearths, and homes with creatures who kept them alive, one warm breath at a time. You run your hand along the rough, cool surface of the mud wall, feeling the uneven texture beneath your fingertips. Those thick walls, made from a mixture of mud, straw, and sometimes dung, weren't just a rustic aesthetic, they were the fortress against winter's cold bite. Medieval peasants relied on these humble materials to create homes that could trap warmth, but how well they did is a story full of surprises. The thatch roof above you, made from layers of straw or reeds, acted like a natural insulator, keeping rain and snow at bay while letting just enough air circulate to avoid suffocating smoke from the hearth. Historians still argue whether these roofs were more of a blessing or curse when it came to cold retention. While they kept water out, they also allowed chilly drafts in if poorly maintained. A leaking roof wasn't just a nuisance, it could be a death sentence during harsh winters. Here's a quirky fact. Some peasants plastered their walls not only with mud but mixed in animal hair or even nettle fibers to add strength and insulation. It's like medieval DIY on steroids. The walls were thick, sometimes up to 2 feet, creating a buffer zone that slowed down the cold but also trapped heat from the inside. Despite these efforts, the homes were still drafty and damp, with cold seeping in through cracks or gaps between stones and timbers. You'd often find doorways covered with animal hides or woven mats to block out drafts, adding another layer of warmth. And remember that smoke-filled air from the hearth, it helped dry out walls and floors but also meant you breathed a cocktail of soot and ash all night. Not the healthiest, but hey, at least you were warm. So as you enjoy your modern insulated walls tonight, think of those mud and thatch shelters, a primitive yet ingenious attempts to keep winter's chill at bay, one mud-smeared hand at a time. You hear the gentle clatter of pots and the soft hiss of boiling water as your family prepares their evening meal. Cooking fires weren't just about filling empty stomachs, they were crucial for staying warm in the long medieval nights. The kitchen fire, often the same hearth that heated the home, provided welcome heat and the comforting aroma of hot food and herbal drinks. Nighttime cooking was a careful balance. You didn't want to keep the fire blazing too high, fuel was precious, but a simmering pot could warm the room and your spirits. Herbal concoctions, like teas made from rosemary, thyme, or even nettle, were common. These weren't just for flavor, some were believed to boost circulation and fight off the creeping cold from inside your body. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval peasants sometimes brewed hot mead or spiced cider to ward off winter chill and lift their mood during the bleak nights. A little buzz might have helped them forget frostbitten toes for a moment. Historians still argue whether these herbal remedies actually had medicinal effects or were simply comfort drinks bolstering morale. Either way, sipping a warm cup by the fire was a ritual that bridged survival and solace. Besides drinks, leftovers from the day's harvest were often cooked into stews or porridges, meals dense with calories needed to fuel the body's fight against the cold. Eating late at night also meant your metabolism stayed active, generating internal warmth while you slept. And don't forget the social aspect. Gathering around the fire to eat, tell stories, or sing songs created warmth far beyond the physical. That glow of connection was just as essential as the flames licking the cold air. So tonight, as you enjoy your dinner or tea, remember the humble medieval kitchen fire, a small beacon of warmth, nourishment, and hope amid the winter darkness. You fumble in the dark, reaching for something to fight the creeping chill. Medieval peasants had their fair share of quirky tricks to stay warm, some practical, others bordering on the bizarre. These odd methods show how desperate and inventive people became when frost threatened their very lives. One such trick was the use of hot stones, heated over the hearth fire. These stones were wrapped in cloth and placed inside beds or near the feet to radiate gentle warmth through the night. It's like having a medieval electric blanket, minus the electricity and safety regulations. You could even hold a warm stone in your hands to chase away numb fingers. So primitive, yes, but effective. Another odd but widespread practice was the application of animal fats. Peasants would sometimes rub rendered fat, like lard or tallow, on exposed skin to protect against cold winds and prevent chapping. It's not your average moisturizer, but think of it as a natural, greasy barrier. Historians still argue whether this actually helped much or if it was more of a hopeful folk remedy. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants wore foot gloves, cloth wrappings soaked in heated substances or layered with insulating materials to keep toes from freezing. These proto-socks might have looked silly, but they were lifesavers in the coldest months. Additionally, people relied on heated bricks or pans filled with hot coals tucked under blankets. Sure, it was a fire hazard, but when your feet are freezing, you are willing to risk a little singed bedding. In the realm of folklore, some medieval communities believed that certain plants or charms, like hanging garlic or burning juniper, could warm a house spiritually, keeping evil and cold at bay. Whether superstition or psychological comfort, these rituals added a layer of hope against the harsh winter. So next time you complain about your electric heater, remember those oddball medieval hacks, a rough, risky, and resourceful ways to wrestle warmth from a merciless world. You take stock of your meager winter stores, root vegetables, dried grains, salted meats, all carefully preserved to carry you through the long, unforgiving cold months. Food wasn't just fuel, it was a key to survival and warmth in medieval peasant life. Proper storage and preparation meant your body could generate the heat needed to face freezing nights without burning out. Cellars, pits, or cool dry rooms were common for storing crops. The challenge was keeping food from spoiling or freezing solid. You learned to pick the right moment to harvest and preserve, timing everything so that you always had calories to burn when temperatures plummeted. Historians still argue how widespread advanced preservation techniques were among peasants, but the fact remains, those who mastered food storage had a better shot at surviving the cold. Here's a quirky fact. Some peasants buried root vegetables in straw or sawdust to insulate them from frost, a simple yet effective trick to keep their vital nutrients accessible. It's like nature's refrigerator, minus the electricity and fancy buttons. Cooking hearty stews or porridges from these preserved foods helped keep the internal furnace burning. High-calorie meals were more than comfort, they were a biochemical necessity. The body's metabolism cranked up to convert those calories into heat. So eating well was literally your best defense against the cold. Another interesting aspect, food scarcity often meant sharing was not optional but essential. Community food sharing ensured even the poorest didn't starve outright during harsh winters, adding another layer of social warmth to the physical. So tonight, as you savor your dinner, remember medieval peasants whose survival hinged on storing and preparing food to keep the cold away, and not just outside, but deep inside their bones. You pull your cloak tighter, not just against the biting cold but against unseen forces that medieval peasants believed lurked in the night. Faith and superstition intertwined deeply with their fight against winter's harshness. offering spiritual warmth alongside physical. Prayers, charms, and rituals were as much a part of the nightly defense as fire and wool. Many believed that cold and illness were linked to evil spirits or curses, so households hung protective amulets, sometimes herbs like rosemary or bundles of garlic to keep the darkness and chill at bay. Blessings over the hearth fire were common, invoking saints to watch over the home through the long, freezing nights. Historians still argue how seriously these beliefs influenced daily life or were more symbolic gestures, but their presence was undeniable. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants used cold stone as a special rocks thought to absorb bad spirits and cold energy, placing them around their homes or even under pillows. While there's no scientific backing, these stones offered psychological comfort, a placebo warmth if nothing else. Rituals could be elaborate or simply lighting a candle on a feast day, saying a prayer before bed, or even leaving a small offering for the household spirits. These acts forged a sense of control in an uncontrollable world, making the bitter cold a little less terrifying. Moreover, church festivals and communal gatherings during winter months provided breaks from isolation, reinforcing social bonds that were vital for mental warmth and resilience. The spiritual and social warmed peasants in ways fire alone couldn't. So as you switch off your lights tonight, consider the invisible warmth of faith and ritual that kept medieval souls from freezing in more ways than one. You shiver slightly and wonder about the hidden toll those cold medieval nights took on your body. The biting chill was more than uncomfortably, it invited health risks that modern science is only beginning to understand. Peasants faced ailments from frostbite and respiratory infections to chronic conditions worsened by cold and damp. Breathing in smoky, cold air with little ventilation could cause respiratory troubles like bronchitis or pneumonia. Hypothermia, though less understood then, was a deadly threat. Historians still argue whether winter mortality spikes were caused more by cold itself or by related factors like poor nutrition and overcrowding. The interplay between environment and health remains a fascinating, debated topic. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval healers recommended wrapping limbs in warm animal fats or applying poultices made from herbs to combat frostbite. While not always effective, these remedies showed an intuitive grasp of protecting the body from cold damage. Repeated exposure to damp conditions also increased the risk of rheumatism and arthritis, ailments often described in medieval texts, though their causes were mysterious. It's like carrying winter's bite in your joints long after the snow melts. Even with these risks, peasants had limited options. They relied on layered clothing, fire, and the odd folk remedy to survive. The lack of understanding about germs or cold-related illnesses meant prevention was often guesswork. So, while you enjoy your cozy, climate-controlled home tonight, remember the invisible struggles medieval peasants faced, battling cold not just for comfort but for life itself. You notice how even within the peasant community, some families seem better wrapped against winter's chill. Wealth, however modest, made a surprising difference in who stayed warm and who shivered through the night. A thicker wool cloak here, a sturdier roof there, it all added up to precious extra degrees of comfort. Peasants with slightly more resources could afford better clothing, more fuel for fires, and improved bedding materials. Even a handful of extra straw or a better insulated hut might tip the balance between frostbitten toes and a good night's sleep. Historians still argue how stark these warmth disparities truly were, but it's clear that small differences in wealth often meant survival advantages. A quirky fact: some better-off peasants owned bed curtains, fabric hung around the bed to trap warmth and block drafts. This luxury was rare but highly effective, creating a personal microclimate amid a cold room. Imagine crawling under a cozy tent each night, while neighbors shiver just a few feet away. Food quality and quantity also varied with wealth, influencing internal warmth. Better-fed peasants could generate more body heat, a hidden advantage in cold months. Social ties played a role. Two wealthier households might host gatherings or share resources, spreading warmth in more ways than one. Still, even the wealthiest peasants were far from toasty by modern standards. The cold was a ruthless equalizer, but it spared the better clothed and sheltered more often. It's a reminder that warmth was more than comfort, it was a matter of life and death. So as you snuggle into your warm bed tonight, remember the medieval peasant family with the threadbare cloak, dreaming of a better winter's night. You hear the night's silence broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling and the soft murmur of someone finishing a late chore. The rhythms of medieval winter nights were shaped not just by cold, but by necessity and survival. Nighttime chores adapted or sometimes paused altogether as peasants balanced conserving warmth and keeping life running. Some work, like tending animals or stoking fires, was vital and could not be skipped. You might find yourself bundling up for quick trips outside to fetch water or check on livestock, the chill biting sharper after exertion. But other tasks, mending tools, weaving, or preparing food were often done during daylight to avoid the deadly cold of night. Historians still argue about how strictly peasants adhered to seasonal work cycles, but evidence shows a distinct shift in activity during winter months. The cold made long, laborious tasks unbearable at night, encouraging a slower pace and more rest when possible. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants used bed work like knitting or sewing tucked under heavy blankets by the hearth, squeezing productivity into warm moments before sleep. It's like medieval multitasking with a thermal twist. Social life also slowed. Evening gatherings happened near the fire, stories told to pass time and share warmth, but outdoor socializing faded until spring. The cold dictated both physical and social rhythms, making night a time for shelter, warmth, and conserving energy. So as you plan your evening, think of medieval peasants adapting their night routines, balancing survival and rest in a world ruled by winter's chill. You finally let your body sink into rest, reflecting on the relentless cold that shaped every breath, every shiver of the medieval night. Those harsh winters were not just a season, they were a trial, a crucible testing the endurance of peasants who faced bitter winds, drafty homes, and scarce resources. Yet, through it all, they survived by weaving together firelight, layered clothing, shared warmth, and a stubborn will to endure. Survival was a patchwork of simple but ingenious methods: mud walls thick with straw, dung-fueled fires, hot stones tucked in beds, and the quiet strength found in communal sleeping. These weren't just random acts of desperation, they were lessons passed down, tested in the crucible of winter's worst. Historians still argue about the exact details, but the bigger truth remains: life went on, often against overwhelming odds. Quirky as it may seem, the mingling of faith and folklore with practical survival created a tapestry of resilience. Charms and prayers warmed hearts as much as wool warmed limbs. And food, carefully stored and prepared, fueled the body's internal furnace against the merciless cold. As you drift toward sleep tonight, consider the enduring human spirit nestled in those frigid huts. Their struggle teaches us about adaptability, community, and finding warmth even when the world outside seems frozen and unforgiving. Rest easy now, knowing that even the coldest night holds a flicker of hope. Word count, 1087. Section 15. Wind down. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy, feel the chill of the day soften into a gentle warmth around you. Imagine the fading embers of a hearth, their glow dimming slowly but comforting still. The night whispers softly, carrying away the sharp edge of cold and carrying in the quiet calm of rest. Breathe in this warmth, let it seep into your bones, wrapping you in a tender embrace that soothes and steadies. No harsh winds can reach you here, no biting frost can steal your peace. Tonight, you are safe, cradled in a cocoon of warmth both ancient and enduring. Let your thoughts drift, unburdened and free, as the world outside sleeps beneath blankets of snow and silence. Rest now, dear friend, and let your dreams carry you gently into dawn. Hey guys, tonight we step into a world frozen in time, literally. You trudge through snow drifts, your breath turning into little clouds that vanish into the biting cold. The wind cuts through ragged cloaks and crude homes, promising that this night might just be your toughest yet. You probably won't survive this without learning some serious survival hacks from medieval villagers who had no central heating, no thermal underwear, and definitely no heated blankets. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments so let's see who's cozy and who's shivering tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Surviving freezing winters in medieval villages was a relentless challenge. Winters often lasted for months, with temperatures plunging well below freezing. Homes were small, built of wood, mud, or stone, offering little insulation. You wake up to icy floors and drafts sneaking through cracks, forcing you to rely on whatever warmth you can muster. Historians still argue whether the severity of winters varied greatly regionally or if the Little Ice Age period made these conditions universally brutal. What's clear is that villagers developed remarkable adaptations to survive. Here's a quirky tidbit: some villagers burned dried animal dung as fuel because wood was scarce, creating smoky fires that smelled awful but kept homes warm enough to stave off frostbite. You might cringe, but it was a lifesaver. Their survival was a delicate dance with nature, food, fire, clothing, and community all intertwined in a nightly battle against the cold. Tonight, you're stepping into their shoes, feeling every frostbite-inducing gust and every flicker of hope from a dying ember. You edge closer to the hearth, the faint glow casting dancing shadows across your humble abode. The fire here isn't just a comfort, it's the lifeblood of your home. Without modern heaters, medieval villagers relied on simple hearth fires to push back the biting cold that seeped through every crack and crevice. Keeping that fire alive was a nightly ritual. You gather whatever fuel you can, wood scraps, dried dung, or straw, and carefully tend the flames so they burn slow and steady through the night. Historians still argue whether most peasant homes had chimneys or simply a hole in the roof to let smoke escape. The absence of proper ventilation meant smoke lingered indoors, irritating eyes and lungs, but oddly, it helped deter insects and perhaps even kept some germs at bay. Here's a quirky tidbit: some villagers heated stones in the fire and placed them in beds to warm their sleeping space as a medieval version of your electric blanket, minus the plug. Talk about resourcefulness. Home design also played a role. Thick mud walls or wattle and daub construction helped insulate the space, while thatched roofs kept rain and snow at bay. Though drafty and damp by modern standards, these structures were the best villagers could manage with limited materials. The hearth was more than heat, it was a gathering spot, a symbol of life amid the bleak winter. As you imagine the smoky warmth enveloping you, think about the countless nights villagers spent huddled close, firelight flickering against faces lined with cold and hope. You pull on rough linen beneath thick woolen garments, layering yourself against the relentless chill. Medieval villagers mastered the art of dressing in layers long before it became a modern fashion statement. Clothing wasn't about style, it was about survival, wrapping yourself in whatever fabrics you could find or afford. Wool was the go-to material, heavy, scratchy, but excellent at trapping heat. Linen, softer and worn next to the skin, helped wick away moisture to prevent chills. Villagers often patched and repurposed old clothes repeatedly, making do with what they had. Historians still argue about the accessibility of multiple outfits for peasants, as some suggest they owned only one or two sets worn year-round, while others think more layering was possible. Here's a quirky tidbit: some villagers stuffed gaps in their clothing with dried moss or hay to add insulation. Imagine walking around with pockets full of straw, fashion forward, maybe not, but effective against frostbite. Accessories like hoods, cloaks, and mittens were common, designed to shield extremities that lost heat fastest. Shoes were often made from thick leather, sometimes lined with fur or cloth scraps, but cold toes remained a perennial problem. So next time you grumble about your winter wardrobe, remember those scratchy layers and mossy stuffing that kept medieval villagers alive through unforgiving winters. The small cellar where root vegetables and salted meats are carefully tucked away, a vital reserve against the frozen world outside. Food preservation was key. Without refrigerators or freezers, medieval villagers had to rely on age-old methods to keep sustenance from spoiling during the long winters. Drying, salting, smoking, and fermenting were common techniques. Meats hung in smokehouses or were cured with salt to last months. Vegetables like turnips, carrots, and cabbages were stored in cool, dark cellars or buried under layers of straw to prevent freezing. Historians still argue how widely accessible such storage facilities were to common folk versus wealthier villagers. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villagers buried food in frozen ponds or snow-packed pits, using natural lights to chill their provisions. Think of it as medieval cold storage, minus the electricity bill. The timing of harvests was critical. Crops had to be gathered before the first frost, and preserving them quickly was a race against the weather. A failed harvest or spoilage could mean hunger and cold bites a little harder on an empty stomach. Stews and porridges made from these stored foods provided the calories needed to fuel the body's internal furnace against the biting cold. Eating late into the evening helped keep villagers warm through the night, their metabolism steadily generating heat. So as you savor your dinner tonight, remember the ingenuity and effort that went into stocking medieval pantries, a silent battle against starvation and frost. You gather with your neighbors near the fire, the cold night pushing everyone closer together. Community wasn't just a social nicety, it was a matter of survival. Villagers banded together in countless ways to weather the harsh winters, sharing warmth, labor, and resources when the frost threatened to overwhelm. From communal barns sheltering livestock to shared firewood piles and cooperative food preparation, working as one increased the odds that everyone survived the freeze. Mutual aid wasn't optional, it was essential. Historians still argue how formal or informal these cooperative efforts were, but the evidence is clear. Survival depended on collaboration. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villages practiced common hearths, large fires tended collectively where villagers could warm themselves and exchange news or stories. Imagine the medieval version of your neighborhood bonfire, minus the s'mores but with plenty of practical warmth. Social bonds also ease mental strain. Long, dark winters could sap spirits, but community gatherings, a weather for religious festivals, markets, or simple storytelling, offered comfort and connection. This social warmth was as vital as any physical insulation. Even labor was shared. Tasks like chopping wood or repairing homes often happened in groups, making the cold work more bearable. In the bleakest months, pooling strength and resources was the difference between enduring and succumbing to winter's grasp. So as you cozy up tonight, think about the countless hands and hearts that linked together to keep the cold at bay in medieval villages. You step into the barn, the warmth of the animals instantly noticeable against the chill outside. Livestock played an outsized role in medieval villagers' winter survival, and not just as food sources but as natural heaters. Housing animals close to or even inside living spaces was common, trading fresh air for warmth in a compromise that sometimes smelled less than pleasant. Cows, sheep, and pigs radiated body heat, raising the temperature inside poorly insulated homes. This practice helped stave off frostbite and added a layer of insulation against icy winds. Historians still argue how widespread indoor animal housing was. Some regions favored separate stables, while harsher climates forced animals indoors for survival. Here's a quirky tidbit. Villagers often used animal manure not only as fuel for fires but also in walls and floors as insulation. Yes, walls sometimes had a whiff of natural warmth, blending biology and architecture in unexpected ways. Feeding and caring for animals in winter was no small task. Frozen water sources and scarce fodder made survival as tough for livestock as for their owners. Yet, their presence was invaluable, providing milk, wool, and warmth that kept villagers going through the darkest months. So tonight, as you enjoy your creature comforts, remember those medieval animals whose breaths and bodies kept entire villages from freezing solid. You pull your cloak tighter as you step outside, the frozen earth crunching beneath your feet. Winter farming and foraging were brutal tests of endurance. Fields lay dormant under snow, and foraging options were scarce, forcing villagers to adapt or starve. The rhythms of agriculture slowed, but survival never stopped. Villagers prepared for winter months by storing surplus crops and drying herbs and roots during autumn. Historians still argue about the extent of winter cultivation, as some evidence suggests limited planting of hardy crops like kale or rye, but the harsh climate mostly curtailed farming activities. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants resorted to snow gardening, scraping snow to find edible plants or digging under frost to access roots and tubers. It was a harsh scavenging game, but every morsel counted. Foraging became a risky venture into the cold wilderness, hunting small game or gathering preserved foods like nuts and berries. Villagers also relied on preserved fish or salted meats from earlier months. Winter work shifted from planting to maintenance, repairing tools, mending fences, and preparing for spring's return. These tasks, done near home, minimized exposure to freezing temperatures. So as you imagine the barren fields tonight, remember the relentless cycle medieval villagers endured, always adapting, always struggling against winter's grip. You settle close to the hearth, feeling the modest heat seep into your chilled bones. Villagers developed some pretty inventive and, frankly, quirky heating hacks to battle the relentless winter cold, often mixing practicality with a dash of superstition. One common method was using heated stones or bricks warmed in the fire and then wrapped in cloth or placed near beds to provide radiant warmth throughout the night. It's like a medieval version of a hot water bottle, minus the rubber. Historians still argue how widespread and effective these methods truly were, but archaeological finds and written accounts hint at their popularity. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some people believe that burning specific herbs like juniper or rosemary not only produced pleasant scents but also carried warming properties and protected against evil spirits that caused illness in winter. Lighting these herbs was both practical and spiritual. Another odd but effective trick was layering animal fats or tallow on exposed skin to create a barrier against freezing winds. Somewhat greasy but surprisingly insulating, this practice might make modern sensibilities cringe, but it was a practical solution in a time without modern lotions or windbreakers. In addition, villagers sometimes hung thick tapestries or animal hides on walls and doorways to block drafts, creating warmer microclimates inside rooms. Every bit of insulation counted when the wind howled outside. So as you cozy up tonight, remember the mix of folk wisdom, resourcefulness, and a little magic medieval villagers relied on to keep winter's chill at bay. You tug your cloak a little tighter as the cold seeps in, but your heart finds warmth in the familiar rituals and beliefs that villagers held on to during winter's darkest days. Faith, rituals, and superstition weren't just comforting, they were essential tools in facing the biting cold and its associated hardships. Villagers believed that certain prayers, charms, and ceremonies could protect their homes and bodies from the evil spirits thought to bring sickness and misfortune during the harsh winter months. Hanging herbs like garlic or rowan berries near doorways wasn't just decoration, it was a protective act. Historians still argue how much these beliefs directly influenced daily life, but their presence in medieval culture is undeniable. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villagers carried cold stones or special amulets believed to absorb winter's chill or evil forces. While scientifically dubious, these objects provided psychological comfort, a form of spiritual warmth when physical warmth was scarce. Church festivals and holy days punctuated the bleak winter, providing social warmth and spiritual reprieve. These gatherings broke isolation, brought communities together, and reinforced shared resilience. Even lighting candles on specific nights was part of warding off darkness and cold. These small flames symbolized hope amid hardship, illuminating both hearth and heart. So tonight, as you settle in, remember that beyond fires and blankets, Medieval villagers armed themselves with faith and ritual, weaving spiritual threads into their fight against winter's chill. You shiver slightly, feeling the deep bite of winter seeping past your layers. Health challenges were an ever-present threat in medieval winter's cold homes. Poor nutrition and limited medical knowledge combined to make illnesses common and often deadly. Respiratory ailments like pneumonia, bronchitis, and tuberculosis thrived in cramped, smoky, and damp homes. The smoke from hearth fires, while providing warmth, also irritated lungs, worsening breathing problems. Historians still argue the exact causes of winter mortality spikes. Was it the cold itself, malnutrition, or contagious diseases exacerbated by close quarters? The answer likely lies in all three. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval healers sometimes used poultices made from herbs like mustard or garlic to treat cold-related ailments, believing these could draw out bad humors or chill. While modern medicine would raise an eyebrow, these remedies offered some relief and a sense of agency. Frostbite was common, especially on extremities like fingers, toes, and noses, and could lead to gangrene if untreated. Limited understanding meant many suffered without effective treatment. Mental health also suffered along. Dark winters brought isolation and despair. Community gatherings and faith played roles in alleviating these burdens, but the struggle was real. So as you enjoy your comfortable, warm home tonight, remember the resilience of those who faced winter's harsh health trials with little more than hope and homemade remedies. You run your hand over the rough timber and thick plaster of your home's walls, marveling at how medieval villagers squeezed warmth from humble architecture. Without modern insulation or heating, every stone, beam, and thatch mattered in keeping out winter's relentless cold. Homes were often built using wattle and daub, a lattice of wood and sticks plastered with mud and straw, offering surprisingly good insulation when maintained. Thick walls absorbed daytime warmth from scarce sunlight and slowly released it at night, acting like thermal batteries. Historians still argue the extent to which these building techniques varied by region and social status, but their effectiveness is undeniable. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villagers plastered walls with mixtures including animal hair or even nettle fibers to add strength and insulation. Think of it as medieval eco-friendly wall reinforcement. Thatched roofs, layered densely with straw or reeds, kept rain and snow out while allowing breathability to prevent mold. However, poorly maintained roofs could leak cold drafts, turning homes into chilly traps. Windows were small or non-existent, covered with oiled parchment or wooden shutters rather than glass, limiting heat loss but also light. Doorways might be blocked with heavy curtains or animal hides to reduce drafts. Floors were often packed earth, sometimes covered with straw or rushes, offering minimal insulation but better than bare ground. So, as you enjoy your insulated walls tonight, remember the humble, ingenious homes that medieval villagers crafted to hold winter's chill at by one thick plastered wall at a time. You adjust your breath, feeling the rhythm slow as the night deepens, knowing that winter's grip not only chilled the bones but dictated the very pace of life. Seasonal work and rest cycles shifted dramatically as villagers adapted to the demands of the cold months. Fields lay fallow beneath snow, so planting and harvesting gave way to tasks like repairing tools, tending fires, and caring for livestock. Historians still argue how strictly villagers adhered to these seasonal routines, but records show a marked slowdown in agricultural activity during winter. Nighttime chores were minimized to conserve warmth and energy. Instead, social activities such as storytelling, singing, or religious observances helped pass the long evenings indoors. Some villagers used the quiet to craft textiles or mend clothing by firelight, maximizing productivity while staying warm. Rest was a crucial component. Conserving energy during the harshest months increased chances of survival. Villagers likely adjusted sleep patterns, sometimes taking naps during daylight or rising late to avoid the coldest hours. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some communities believed in hibernation periods, limiting physical activity and embracing rest much like animals. Whether literal or metaphorical, this practice reflects an instinctive adaptation to winter's challenges. So as you settle tonight, think about how medieval villagers balanced labor and leisure, chore and chill, dancing to winter's slow, cold beat. You watch over the youngest and oldest members of your village, knowing that cold winters hit them hardest. Children and elders required special care, their bodies less resilient to the relentless freeze and harsh conditions. Babies were often wrapped in multiple layers of cloth or swaddling bands to protect fragile limbs from frostbite. Mothers did their best to keep infants close to the body for warmth, using slings or shared bedding. Historians still argue how high infant mortality was during winter months, but it's clear that vulnerability was a constant concern. Elders, meanwhile, struggled with ailments exacerbated by cold and dampness, such as arthritis and respiratory illnesses. Community members often took on caregiving roles, providing warmth and nourishment to those less able to fend for themselves. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villages had special warming benches near the hearth, designed to hold elders or children during the coldest times, maximizing shared body heat in a small space. Nutrition also played a role. Feeding vulnerable individuals high-calorie foods helped maintain body heat. Social bonds and family structures were critical in ensuring care and protection. So tonight, as you nestle into warmth, remember the delicate balance of life in medieval villages, where the youngest and oldest depended on the warmth and kindness of others to survive winter's harshest nights. You notice the subtle yet stark differences in how warmth and resources are spread across the village. Wealth disparities affected winter survival in tangible ways. Even among peasants, a few extra coins could buy thicker wool, more firewood, or better food storage, giving some villagers a notable edge against the cold. Wealthier peasants might afford a stone or brick home with better insulation, or own bed curtains and multiple sets of clothing, luxuries beyond the reach of many. Historians still argue how pronounced these differences were, but the correlation between wealth and winter survival is undeniable. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some wealthier peasants kept small heated boxes, called warming pans, filled with hot coals to carry from room to room, a medieval portable heater, if you will. For others, such comforts were unimaginable. Food quality and quantity also varied. Richer households enjoyed fresher meat and preserved delicacies, while poorer families subsisted on simpler, less calorie-dense fare. These nutritional gaps influenced the ability to generate body heat during freezing months. Social status could also affect community support networks. Those with influence might secure more help during scarcity, while the poorest faced isolation. So tonight, as you enjoy your comforts, remember the quiet inequalities that shaped who stayed warm and who shivered through medieval winters. You settle down at last, letting the cold world slip away as you reflect on the incredible resilience of medieval villagers. Their winters were relentless, yet they met each day with resourcefulness, community, and an unyielding will to survive. Without modern tools, they crafted warmth from fire, clothing, faith, and fellowship. Their homes, though simple, were marvels of practical design, balancing the elements with mud, straw, and timber. Their clothing, patched and layered, shielded them from frost. Shared fires and bodies brought physical and social warmth, while rituals and superstitions offered psychological comfort. Historians still debate many details of how widespread certain practices were, or how much faith influenced survival, but one thing is clear: the human spirit persisted. Their lessons remind us of adaptability and the power of community in facing adversity. As you drift toward sleep, carry with you the echoes of those ancient nights, a tapestry woven from smoke, shadow, and warmth, stretching across centuries. Word count, 1094. Section 15. Wind down. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy, feel the cold fade softly into a gentle warmth surrounding you. Imagine the hearth's last glowing embers, their flicker calming, comforting. The world outside sleeps beneath blankets of snow and silence, but here, you are safe. Breathe in this warmth, let it seep into your bones, wrapping you in a tender embrace. The cold is a distant memory now, replaced by the soothing quiet of rest. Let your thoughts drift freely, unburdened, as you surrender to gentle dreams and the promise of dawn's light. Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where the cold isn't just uncomfortably, it's a relentless, biting enemy. Imagine yourself trudging through a dark, frozen medieval village, the icy wind slicing through your threadbare cloak as you clutch what little warmth you can find. The moonlight glints off snow that crunches beneath your worn boots, and every breath you take sends a frosty cloud into the chill air. You probably won't survive this night without a few centuries of trial and error guiding you, but don't worry, I've got you covered. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments so let's see where you're cozy, or not, while we dive into this. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in the humble peasant's world, where winter is not a season but a test of endurance. Without central heating or cozy down jackets, your survival depends on what little resources your village can muster. The nights are long, often stretching over 16 hours of darkness in winter's peak, and the cold penetrates everything. Medieval peasants knew the chill intimately, living in drafty homes made of wattle and daub, their walls thin and often cracked. Fireplaces were basic, and fuel scarce. Wood was precious. You wrap yourself in coarse woolen garments, rough against the skin but effective. Underneath, layers of linen offer minimal protection, but anything softer is a luxury you can't afford. You huddle close to the hearth, the smoke curling around your head, eyes stinging. But the fire's warmth is a lifeline. Outside, the bitter wind howls like a beast, and frost creeps through the cracks in your window shutters. The cold bites deeper than the frost. It seeps into your bones, making even the simplest tasks monumental. Historians still argue whether peasants' winter deaths were mostly from exposure or disease aggravated by cold. But one thing's clear, surviving the long nights was an all-consuming challenge. You might chuckle at the thought of crocodile dung sunscreen from ancient times, but here, in the medieval cold, it's all about what keeps you alive when everything wants to freeze you out. You step inside your modest medieval home, a single-room cottage made from wattle and daub, with a roof of thatch so thick it seems to swallow the weak winter light. The walls, a patchwork of woven branches plastered with clay and straw, wobble ever so slightly in the chill breeze that finds its way through every crack and crevice. Despite all this, there's a surprising cleverness in how your ancestors built these homes to keep warmth in or at least slow its escape. The floors are bare earth, sometimes covered with rushes or straw to soften the cold bite beneath your feet. The windows are little more than holes stuffed with oiled parchment or thin cloth, letting in just enough light but barely any heat. The door is heavy and wooden, but even it surrenders a bit to the cold drafts that sneak inside when it swings open. One key trick was the central hearth, a fire pit dug into the floor or a rudimentary stone fireplace that served as the heart of the home. Smoke didn't funnel cleanly up a chimney as we expect today. Instead, it often filled the room, escaping through a hole in the roof or gaps in the walls. The smoke was a pest, stinging your eyes and making your clothes smell like burnt wood, but it also had a side benefit. It helped keep away insects and even preserved the thatch on the roof from pests. You probably wouldn't fancy living here for long, but your ancestors made do, knowing how to seal the worst drafts with rushes, animal skins, or thick tapestries. Historians still argue whether these basic shelters really kept out enough cold to make a significant difference, but considering the many who lived and froze there, it was at least somewhat effective. A quirky detail is that in some regions, peasants plastered their walls with a mixture including cow dung, not just for structure but because it had insulating qualities and helped repel insects. Not exactly your modern wall paint, but hey, it worked, and it definitely beats crocodile dung for sunscreen, if you recall from last time. So, as you settle into the modest warmth of this little shelter, you realize how every material and design choice was a small victory against the harsh medieval winter. You pull your threadbare woolen cloak tighter around your shoulders, the coarse fabric rough but oddly comforting against your skin. Clothes in the Middle Ages weren't fashion statements for peasants, they were battle gear against the cold. Wool was your best friend, a warm, water-resistant, and somewhat durable. Linen, softer but thinner, often served as an underlayer, but it did little to keep out the biting chill. Your shoes, probably made from tough leather, have seen better days, and your stockings are patched more times than you can count. There's no such thing as synthetic insulation or fancy down here, just natural fibers and a whole lot of layering. You've heard that the wealthy sometimes stuffed their clothes with moss or other natural materials for extra warmth, but for you, a simple wool tunic and hood are all you get. One quirky practice was felting wool to make it denser and warmer. Felted wool was surprisingly effective at blocking wind and trapping heat, and peasants often made hats or cloaks this way. Oddly enough, in some regions, people believed that washing wool too often made it lose its warmth, so garments were worn through multiple seasons before getting a proper washing. Not exactly the freshest habit, but survival came first. And speaking of habits, here's a fun medieval superstition. Some peasants thought that wearing clothes inside out during a cold snap would trick evil spirits into thinking you were someone else, protecting you from winter illnesses. You might want to skip that advice unless you're a fan of embarrassing fashion choices. Historians still argue whether these clothes truly protected peasants from hypothermia or if many simply relied on sheer endurance and community help to survive. After all, the cold was relentless, and sometimes, even the warmest wool couldn't save you. So, as you layer your clothes, rough and scratchy though they may be, you're reminded that in the Middle Ages, warmth was life, and every thread counted. You crouch close to the hearth, where flickering flames cast jittery shadows on the wattle walls, the warmth a thin veil against the icy air pressing in from every corner. The fire is your lifeline in this medieval chill, but managing it is an art as much as a necessity. Wood is precious. The long winter has drained your village's supply, and every log burned must count. Fuel scarcity means you often burn whatever you can: twigs, dried dung, even scraps of old leather, anything that ignites. It's a delicate balance. Keep the fire alive but don't let it consume your last reserves. The smoke curls thickly around the room, stinging your eyes and leaving a layer of soot on everything. Yet, that smoky haze isn't just a byproduct, it's a grim guardian, keeping insects and mold at bay. Without a chimney, the smoke's escape is a hole in the roof or the gaps in the walls. It's not ideal. You cough, and your hair smells of smoke for days, but it beats freezing in silence. In fact, the smoky environment may have had some health benefits, as researchers have found that smoke particles can reduce certain pathogens, though it's hardly a luxury anyone would choose. Fire safety, however, is a constant concern. One stray spark could ignite the dry thatch above, turning your humble home into a blaze within minutes. Villagers slept lightly, ever alert for signs of fire, a nightmare risk lurking beneath the comfort of warmth. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some villages, firekeepers, often young boys or elders, were tasked with maintaining the hearth fires through the night. Their job was part vigilante, part babysitter, ensuring the flame never died. This role was taken very seriously, partly because letting the fire go out was almost a death sentence. and partly because it was a perfect excuse to stay awake and avoid chores. Historians still argue whether centralized hearths were widespread or if many peasants relied on small braziers or open fires in separate cooking huts to avoid smoke inhalation. Either way, the fire's warmth was non-negotiable in surviving those brutal nights. So, you breathe in the acrid smoke, feel the fire's heat on your face, and appreciate that these humble flames were among your ancestors' fiercest weapons against the cold. You crawl into the shared bed, the wooden frame creaking under the weight of your family clustered like huddling penguins. The nights are long and bitter, and sleeping alone in the cold stone floor is a death sentence nobody dares try. Here, warmth isn't just about fiery, it's about bodies, close and tangled, sharing every scrap of heat. Your bed isn't the plush mattress you might imagine but rather a simple pallet stuffed with straw or hay, often topped with thick animal skins. These skins, usually sheepskin or cowhide, are prized possessions. They trap body heat and provide a softer, warmer barrier between you and the cold, hard floor. If you're lucky, your family's pet dog or cat curls up at your feet, adding its own warmth and companionship. Space is tight, privacy non-existent, and sometimes the heat becomes overwhelming, turning the room into a sauna. But those moments of stifling closeness are life-saving. Sleeping this way can raise your core temperature by several degrees compared to lying alone, and in medieval winters, every degree counted. A quirky fact is that in some regions, peasants slept in shifts or rotated sleeping positions so that the coldest member could take the warmest spot by the fire or among the bodies. It's a little like musical chairs but with frostbite, and there's evidence some families used bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals, wrapped in cloth and placed under the bed covers. They were fiddly and risky but a cherished luxury. Historians still argue whether these shared sleeping arrangements were a matter of necessity, cultural custom, or both. Some suggest that it wasn't just the cold that drove people together but also social bonding and protection. Regardless, the reality was that warmth was best shared. So, as you nestle close to your kin, feeling the slow rhythm of breath and heartbeat around you, you realize that in those cold medieval nights, survival was a family affair, one that depended on shared heat and shared hope. You sit by the fire, spoon in hand, as the thick stew bubbles in a heavy pot, sending up steamy wisps that warm your face. Food in winter isn't just fuel, it's a crucial source of warmth from the inside out. Medieval peasants relied on hearty, calorie-rich meals to generate body heat and keep the chill at bay during those long, dark nights. Root vegetables like turnips and parsnips, along with barley and oats, formed the backbone of their diet. Meat was rare and often reserved for special occasions. So much of the warmth came from slow-cooked stews packed with whatever was at hand: dried beans, cabbage, onions, and pungent herbs. Spices like mustard seed or horseradish, though expensive, were occasionally used to add a spicy kick that literally made you sweat and feel warmer. Interestingly, some peasants believed that eating spicy or bitter herbs could ward off the cold itself or even winter illness. A folk remedy now viewed more as comforting placebo than scientific fact. You might raise an eyebrow at that, but who's to say a little warmth from a fiery stew didn't ease a shivering soul? Historians still argue whether the average medieval diet provided enough calories to sustain high activity levels in freezing conditions. Some archaeological evidence points to seasonal malnutrition, which made peasants more vulnerable to cold and disease. You might chuckle imagining medieval energy drinks, a dubious mix of fermented honey, herbs, and sometimes nettle sipped to boost vitality during the cold months. Not quite your modern Gatorade, but hey, whatever helped them get through the frost. So, as you savor the rich, smoky aroma of your simple stew, you realize that food was more than survival. It was a small comfort, a shield against the unforgiving winter cold that gnawed at body and spirit alike. You step outside into the crisp evening air, where a small cluster of villagers gathers around a fire pit, their breath visible as soft puffs in the freezing night. Winter was a time not just of hardship but also of community, when warmth wasn't just physical but also social. Gathering together meant shared heat, shared stories, and the kind of spirit that no frost could kill. Festivals like Yule or Candlemas punctuated the darkest months, offering much-needed breaks from the relentless cold. People would huddle together, singing, dancing, and feasting to keep morale high. The laughter and music, echoing through the night, were as vital as the fire's glow, reminding everyone that even in the harshest times, human connection was a survival tool. You might be surprised to learn that communal work like cooperative wood chopping or shared tending of livestock also brought people physically close, creating pockets of warmth and camaraderie. These shared labors fostered bonds that extended beyond survival, weaving the fabric of medieval village life. Quirkily, some communities lit good luck fires, which were believed to ward off winter spirits and protect the village from illness. The embers from these fires were sometimes carried home to relight hearths, symbolizing continuity and protection. Historians still argue about how much these gatherings actually improved survival odds versus simply offering emotional relief. Either way, the sense of togetherness made the cold nights less isolating and more bearable. So as you join your neighbors around the crackling flames, feeling the buzz of warmth and laughter, you realize that in the cold medieval winters, community wasn't just a comfort, it was a lifeline. You awake to the low grunts and shuffles of livestock stirred in the corner of your humble home. In the biting cold, it's common practice for peasants to bring animals inside at night, turning their living quarters into a warm, if somewhat smelly, refuge. That patch of body heat from cows, pigs, and chickens isn't just welcome, it's essential. Imagine sharing your room with a dozen barnyard animals. The heat they generate is a natural heater, raising the temperature of your cramped cottage just enough to stave off frostbite. Of course, it comes with the downside of odors, noise, and the constant fear of diseases spreading through such close quarters. But when the alternative is freezing, you adapt. The animals' breaths fog up the room, their hooves clattering on earthen floors, and their occasional snorts blend with the crackling of the hearth. Far from idyllic, but effective, peasants took pride in caring for their livestock, knowing that the animals' survival through winter was as important as their own. A quirky medieval practice involved smearing animal fat on walls or around doorways, believed to protect against cold spirits or illness, something like a medieval cold weather talisman. It's odd, maybe, but in a world where superstition and practicality intertwined, it made perfect sense. Historians still argue whether this indoor animal keeping was widespread or limited to specific regions with harsher winters. Archaeological digs have found evidence of barnyards attached directly to homes, suggesting this practice was at least common in some areas. So, as you dodge a cow's tail in the dim light, you understand that in the medieval cold, warmth came from unexpected places, and that sometimes survival meant cozying up with your barnyard buddies. You feel the first tickle of a cough creeping in, a reminder that the cold doesn't just bite your skin, it attacks your health. Winter and sickness were a deadly duo in the Middle Ages. The bitter chill weakened bodies, lowered immunity, and allowed infections to spread like wildfire through cramped, smoky cottages. Illnesses like pneumonia, influenza, and bronchitis were often the real killers, masquerading behind the harsh frost. Children and the elderly were especially vulnerable, with many succumbing to ailments exacerbated by cold and poor nutrition. Peasants turned to folk remedies, a mix of herbal concoctions, prayers, and rituals. You might find someone chewing on willow bark for fever or bathing in warm herbal infusions made from sage or thyme to ease aches. There was also a widespread belief that cold drafts carried evil spirits or miasmas that caused disease, leading to practices like covering windows with cloth or using pungent herbs to purify the air. One quirky tidbit is the use of plague stone as a hollow stones filled with vinegar or salt water placed outside homes to disinfect coins during trade, showing early attempts at disease control. Even if the science was missing, you might chuckle at such primitive methods now, but for peasants, these were lifelines. Historians still argue how effective these remedies really were and whether medieval peasants understood disease transmission or just stumbled upon some helpful practices by chance. Either way, cold and sickness formed a vicious cycle hard to break. So as you clutch your herbal brew and listen to the crackle of the dying fire, you know that surviving the winter was as much about fighting invisible enemies as braving the cold itself. You carefully unwrap your threadbare cloak, mindful of the stories woven into every stitch. Clothing in the Middle Ages wasn't just practical, it was steeped in superstition and quirky traditions, especially when battling the brutal cold. For example, some peasants believed that knitting your own hat would bring warmth and protection. But if you forgot to leave a small hole or stitch undone, the warmth would somehow escape. It sounds odd now, but this belief shaped how garments were made, blending craftsmanship with folklore. Wool care was another fascinating area. Washing wool was often avoided during winter because it was thought to make garments less warm. Instead, people aired out their clothes, sometimes hanging them near fires or outside on cold, frosty mornings to freshen them up. Smells weren't as offensive back then after all. Who had time or resources for daily baths? A fun quirk. In some villages, it was customary to wear a certain color or garment inside out during cold snaps to confuse evil spirits believed to cause chills or illness. This kind of clothing magic was a way to exert some control over the harsh, uncontrollable winter forces. Historians still argue whether these clothing superstitions had any real impact on survival or were more about psychological comfort and community identity. Regardless, these beliefs show how deeply intertwined daily life and folklore were in medieval survival. So as you patch up your worn garments and adjust your hood, remember that every thread carries a story not just of warmth but of hope, belief, and the human desire to outwit the cold. You pull on your worn boots and step outside into the crisp morning air, the frost crunching beneath your feet. Winter doesn't mean hiding indoors. Life goes on, and so does the work. Gathering firewood, tending animals, and even ice fishing become essential tasks that keep the village alive. Despite the biting cold, wood chopping is a communal effort. You and your neighbors set out early, axes in hand, to harvest dead branches and fallen trees, a precious fuel for those hearth fires. The work is exhausting, muscles burning in the frigid air, but the reward is warmth and survival. You're careful to avoid overcutting, knowing that wood is a finite resource. Ice fishing is a seasonal oddity that many peasants rely on, cutting holes in frozen lakes or rivers. You drop lines or nets to catch fish trapped beneath the ice. It's a dangerous task. Thin ice and freezing water pose constant risks. Yet, the fresh fish provide vital nutrition and a welcome change from the usual winter diet. A quirky practice is wearing fingerless gloves or wrapping hands in woolen strips to keep dexterity while working outdoors. It's a small innovation that balances warmth and function, proving medieval peasants were resourceful even in freezing conditions. Historians still argue how much work was realistically done during the coldest months, with some suggesting that severe winters forced villagers into extended rest periods, while others see winter labor as vital to community survival. So, as you swing your axe and feel the sting of cold in your lungs, you understand that winter work was grueling but necessary. Each task a step toward conquering the freeze. You huddle closer to the small clay stove in the corner, its modest warmth a precious comfort in the biting cold. While grand castles boasted elaborate heating, peasant homes relied on simple innovations to eke out every degree of comfort. Early heating devices like foot warmers, small clay pots filled with hot embers, or stone slabs heated by the fire were humble but effective. Foot warmers, often wooden boxes filled with hot coals or stones, were passed from person to person during the coldest nights. You might find yourself tucking one under your blanket, wincing a little as the heat seeps through thin fabric, but grateful nonetheless. Primitive stoves made of clay or stone absorbed heat from the fire and slowly radiated it into the room, a technique borrowed and adapted across rural Europe. Some peasants crafted bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals, carefully wrapped in cloth and slid beneath the bedding. It was a risky business, with tales of smoldering blankets and near fires, but it demonstrated a hunger for warmth so intense that people would gamble with fire. Quirkily, in parts of England and Scandinavia, heated stones or bricks were used not just for beds but also as hand warmers, passed around in social gatherings to keep fingers from freezing mid-story. Imagine a medieval hot potato game but with warmth instead of embarrassment. Historians still argue how widespread and effective these heating devices really were among the poorest peasants. Archaeological evidence is spotty, but written accounts hint that ingenuity often compensated for lack of resources. So as you cradle a warmed stone in your palm, you appreciate these small sparks of invention that brought a bit of heat and hope to those relentlessly cold nights. You hear the distant tolling of the church bell, cutting through the cold morning fog like a steady heartbeat. The church wasn't just a spiritual refuge during the harsh medieval winters, it was a practical one as well. Its role in helping peasants survive went far beyond sermons and prayers. During winter, church charity became a critical lifeline. Wealthier parishioners donated food, firewood, and sometimes even clothing to the poorer villagers. Monasteries often ran almshouses or hospices, offering shelter to the sick and elderly who couldn't endure the cold alone. This communal support was vital in a world without government aid or social safety nets. Religious practices also shaped how people endured winter. Candlelight vigils, processions, and festivals like Christmas and Candlemas brought warmth through community and ritual. Lighting candles was more than decoration, it symbolized hope, protection, and divine warmth against the dark cold. The flickering flames in drafty churches and homes provided both literal and spiritual light. A quirky note: some medieval peasants believed that blessing their homes with holy water or hanging relics above their hearths could ward off winter spirits that brought illness or frostbite. Whether or not you were devout, these rituals offered psychological comfort amid relentless hardship. Historians still argue about how much practical support the church provided versus its spiritual role, but it's clear that faith and charity were intertwined lifelines that shaped medieval winter survival. So as you step into the warm glow of your village church, you feel the mingling of hope, warmth, and community, the intangible flames that kept many alive through the coldest nights. You brush snow from your shoulders and glance at the worn stones around the village, wondering how well your ancestors truly endured those bitter winters. The story of medieval peasants surviving cold nights is far from simple. Historians still debate how effective their strategies were and how many simply didn't make it. Archaeological evidence of frozen skeletons, remains of dwellings, and household items paints a mixed picture. Some villages show signs of resilience: thick-walled homes, communal hearths, and food storage methods that suggest preparation. Others reveal harsh realities: malnutrition, signs of respiratory disease, and hurried burial pits hinting at winter mortality spikes. One fringe theory suggests that peasants deliberately limited activity and food consumption in winter, entering a state akin to mild hibernation to conserve energy. It's an intriguing idea but remains speculative. More mainstream historians argue that winter survival was a constant struggle, relying heavily on community support and luck. A quirky archaeological find: in some northern villages, researchers uncovered odd footprints of medieval boot shapes preserved in frozen peat, giving clues about footwear and movement during icy months. It's a cold footprint in history literally. Historians still argue whether the romanticized image of the hardy peasant fully captures the brutal reality of medieval winters. What's clear is that winter shaped not only survival tactics but also social structures and cultural practices. So as you trace those ancient cold tracks, you appreciate the complexity behind the simple question, how did they really make it through? You stand at the edge of the village, watching your breath mingle with the crisp winter air as the sun sets behind frost-covered trees. The harsh lessons of medieval winters still echo today, shaping rural life and traditions in ways you might never have expected, from the way modern cold weather gear mimics layered wool to the communal gatherings that continue in various forms. The legacy of those long, freezing nights lives on. Some of the survival tricks like sharing warmth, preserving food, and respecting nature's rhythms remain surprisingly relevant. Oddly enough, a few medieval hacks, such as using smoked rooms to preserve meat or employing natural insulating materials, have found their way into contemporary sustainable living movements. It's a reminder that sometimes, old wisdom carries a quiet power. Historians still argue how much modern winter resilience owes to medieval survival knowledge versus technological progress. But one thing is clear, the human spirit's ability to adapt and endure the cold is timeless. So as you wrap yourself in your own modern coat, you carry forward the warmth of centuries past, a testament to survival, ingenuity, and community through the coldest nights. Now, as the day fades into night and the chill settles softly around you, take a deep breath and feel the warmth that surrounds you, even if it's just a quiet room and a cozy blanket. Imagine the flicker of a distant hearth, the gentle murmur of voices shared in the dark, the steady pulse of life pushing back against the cold. The long winters of the past may have been harsh and unforgiving, but they've forged bonds that warmed more than just bodies. In the silence of night, let the stories of survival, hope, and simple human kindness lull you gently. Feel your muscles relax, your breath slow, and the world soften around you. Rest easy, knowing that those who faced the darkest, coldest nights found ways to endure, and so will you. The frost may bite outside, but inside, warmth is a memory, a promise, and a quiet strength. Sweet dreams, and until next time. Hey guys, tonight we dive into a world where the cold isn't just a nuisance, it's a fight for your very survival. Imagine trudging through a biting medieval winter night, the wind slicing through your thin cloak as frost settles on your eyelashes. Your breath clouds in the frigid air, and every step crunches on icy ground. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without centuries of trial, error, and stubborn grit behind you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so we can share where you're cozy while we explore these freezing nights. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You live in a time without heaters, electric blankets, or even insulated walls. Winter nights stretch long and unforgiving, sometimes 16 hours of near darkness, while temperatures drop to bone-chilling lows. Your home is a simple shelter, your clothes scratchy layers of wool and linen, and your only warmth comes from a smoky hearth fire and the bodies huddled close. Medieval peasants faced winters that could freeze their crops, their water, and sometimes even their hopes. Historians still argue whether exposure or disease claimed more lives in these months, but either way, surviving the cold was a constant, exhausting battle. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from ancient times? Well, here, it's all about how your ancestors fought off frostbite, windbite, and night after night of bitter cold with nothing but what nature gave them and a stubborn will to live. You step inside your humble medieval shelter, a small cottage crafted from wattle and daub, a lattice of branches plastered with clay and straw. The walls wobble gently, a far cry from modern insulation, but they do their best to block the bitter wind howling outside. The thatched roof, thick and uneven, muffles the cold but leaks light from a few gaps where snow might sneak in. The floors are hard-packed earth, sometimes strewn with rushes or straw for a bit of softness and to keep the chill at bay. Windows, well, they're often just small holes covered with oiled parchment or animal hide, letting in faint light but precious little warmth. Doors creak open, admitting gusts of frosty air, and every draft feels like a tiny battle lost against winter. Your fire pit sits in the center, the hearth offering a lifeline against the cold. But smoke curls through the room, stinging your eyes and settling on every surface. Without a chimney to channel it away, the haze lingers, making the air thick but oddly protective against pests. Some peasants plastered their walls with cow dung mixed into the clay, not just for sturdiness but because it helped insulate and repel insects. It's a far cry from modern wall paint, but it worked well enough. Historians still argue whether these shelters truly kept out enough cold or if their effectiveness varied wildly by region and season. What's clear is that these simple homes were a mix of necessity, ingenuity, and sometimes, just plain luck. So as you settle near the smoky hearth, you realize your ancestors' shelter was a fragile but vital shield against the relentless medieval winter. You pull your coarse wool cloak tighter around your shoulders, the rough fabric scratching your skin but offering much-needed warmth. Clothes in the Middle Ages weren't about style for peasants, they were survival gear against the biting cold. Wool was king, thick, insulating, and water-resistant. Beneath it, layers of linen served as the base, soft but not very warm. Your boots, crafted from tough leather, have seen better days, and your stockings are patched countless times. No fancy synthetic fibers here, just what nature and skilled hands provided. Interestingly, some peasants felted their wool, making it denser and windproof, a clever hack that kept frost at bay better than loose weaves. Washing wool was often avoided in winter because it was believed to reduce its insulating properties. Instead, people aired their garments by hanging them near fires or on frosty mornings, which might not sound pleasant, but it was better than the alternatives. Here's a quirky tidbit: some believed wearing clothes inside out during cold snaps could fool evil spirits into leaving you alone. A fashion statement? Hardly, but a psychological shield against the uncontrollable winter. Historians still argue whether these clothing practices genuinely improved survival odds or if sheer resilience and community support played bigger roles. Either way, your threadbare layers tell a story of grit woven through every stitch. So as you adjust your hood and layer your clothes, remember each garment is a small victory against the unforgiving cold. You crouch close to the hearth, the flickering flames your only real defense against the biting chill. Fires were sacred lifelines in medieval homes, but managing them was an art form born from scarcity and necessity. Wood was precious, especially in deep winter, and burning every log too quickly meant risking freezing in darkness. Fuel wasn't limited to wood. Peasants burned dried dung, twigs, and even scraps of leather to keep the fire alive. The smoke filled the low-ceilinged room, stinging your eyes and leaving a stubborn scent on everything. Without chimneys, smoke drifted upward, escaping through roof gaps or holes, making indoor air thick but oddly protective against pests and mold. Fire safety was paramount. One stray spark could ignite the dry thatch roof, turning your shelter into ashes in minutes. Some villages appointed firekeepers, often children or elders, who vigilantly maintained the hearth throughout long nights, a task both vital and dreaded. A quirky fact: in some communities, the smoke was thought to keep evil spirits at bay, an unintended benefit of the smoky haze. Imagine fighting frostbite while dodging ghostly threats. Some medieval winters weren't just cold, they were spooky. Historians still argue whether open hearths or separate cooking huts were more common, with some evidence suggesting peasants balanced warmth with the risks of smoke inhalation. Regardless, the hearth fire was a central figure in the fight against winter's chill. So as you breathe in the smoky air, you appreciate that these humble flames were among the fiercest weapons your ancestors had against the relentless cold. You collapse into a shared bed, the wooden frame creaking under the combined weight of your family. The bitter cold makes sleeping alone impossible, so everyone crowds together, a tangle of limbs and breath, creating a small island of warmth in the icy dark. Privacy is a luxury lost to survival. Your mattress isn't a fluffy cloud but a simple pallet stuffed with straw or hay, topped with thick animal hides prized for their insulating power. Sheepskin, especially, is a coveted treasury, soft enough to ease aches, dense enough to trap precious body heat, The family dog, curled at your feet, adds its own warmth, occasionally shifting with a sleepy grunt. In some villages, bed sharing was so vital that families slept in shifts, rotating who got the warmest spot near the fire or among bodies. Bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals wrapped in cloth, were passed around to stave off the worst chill, though they were risky business, capable of sparking fires if handled carelessly. You might find it amusing or claustrophobic, but these intimate arrangements were survival strategies, not social choices. Historians still debate whether such practices were widespread or more regionally specific, but evidence suggests tight quarters were the norm in cold months. So as you nestle close to your kin, feeling the gentle rise and fall of breaths and the steady warmth of flesh against flesh, you realize that in these freezing times, warmth was a shared blessing and the bed a battleground against the cold. You sit by the hearth, spooning thick stew into your mouth, savoring its smoky warmth that seeps into your chilled bones. Food in medieval winters was more than sustancia, it was a source of internal heat, a way to fight the cold from within. Stews made from root vegetables like turnips, onions, and parsnips simmered for hours, their aromas weaving through the smoky air. Meat was scarce, mostly reserved for special occasions, so the diet leaned heavily on grains of barley, oats, and rye, often transformed into porridge or dense bread. Spices were precious, but a pinch of mustard seed or horseradish sometimes found its way into dishes, offering a fiery kick that made you sweat and temporarily forget the chill. Interestingly, some peasants believed certain herbs could ward off cold or illness. Sage, thyme, and juniper were common additions to winter recipes. You might smirk at this medieval hot sauce, but there's truth in that warmth-boosting effect. Even if the science was a bit fuzzy, historians still argue whether peasants got enough calories to sustain energy during harsh winters or if seasonal shortages made malnutrition a common and deadly problem. It's likely the truth lies somewhere in between, with food scarcity compounding the cold's dangers. You might chuckle imagining medieval energy drinks, a fermented honey mixed with herbs, a far cry from your modern Gatorade but a vital boost when working in freezing fields. So as you savor the simple, smoky stew, you realize food was both comfort and weapon in the battle against brutal winter cold. You step outside into the frosty twilight, joining a gathering of villagers huddled around a communal fire. Winter was not just a season of hardship but also one of connection. In the bleakest months, social bonds became as important as blankets or firewood. Gatherings, festivals, and shared work offered warmth that no fire alone could provide. Yule celebrations, Candlemas, and other religious festivals broke the monotony of cold and darkness. Villagers sang, danced, and feasted, sharing stories and laughter that chased away the biting chill. The mingling of breath and voices created a bubble of warmth and hope amid the frost. Communal labor, such as cooperative wood gathering or barn repairs, also brought people together. These moments of collective effort forged bonds that transcended mere survival, knitting the social fabric tighter during harsh times. A quirky tradition involved lighting good luck fires believed to repel winter spirits and illness. Embers from these fires were sometimes taken home to rekindle household hearths, symbolizing continuity and protection. Historians still argue how much these social rituals improved physical survival versus providing psychological relief. Regardless, the power of community in withstanding winter's harshness was undeniable. So, as you share warmth and stories around the crackling fire, you feel the invisible threads tying you to generations past, people who knew that together, they could endure the cold. You awaken to the low grunts and shuffling of animals nestled close in the corner of your home. In bitter winter, it was common for peasants to bring livestock indoors, sharing their living space with cows, pigs, and chickens. This close proximity was less about cuddling and more about survival, as the body heat from animals helped keep the cottage from freezing solid. Imagine sleeping beside a cow whose warm breath fogs the air, mingling with the smoke from the hearth. The scent is pungent, a mix of hay, manure, and animal musk, and the constant sounds of snuffling and shifting feed make privacy a distant memory. Yet this trade-off was vital. A warmth from livestock could mean the difference between life and death on a frigid night. Some peasants went so far as to smear animal fat on walls or door frames, believing it would protect against cold spirits or disease. It might sound odd now, but in a world where superstition and survival blended, every bit of protection counted. Historians still argue how widespread indoor animal keeping was, with archaeological evidence pointing to this practice primarily in northern regions where winters were harshest. Either way, the warmth provided by livestock was a cherished, if smelly, lifeline. So, as you dodge a swishing tail and breathe in the heavy air, you realize medieval warmth came from unlikely sources and that survival often meant close company with barnyard neighbors. You feel a tickle in your throat, a subtle warning that the cold is starting to take its toll beyond just chilled fingers and frozen toes. Winter in medieval times wasn't just about battling frostbite, it was a deadly season for illness. The cold weakened bodies and immune systems, making infections like pneumonia, bronchitis, and the flu far more lethal. Huddled in cramped, smoky rooms with little ventilation, diseases spread rapidly. Children and the elderly were especially vulnerable, and winter mortality rates soared. Peasants relied on folk remedies, herbal brews made from sage, thyme, or willow bark, and rituals involving prayers, charms, and sometimes more bizarre cures. One quirky tradition involved plague stone, as a hollowed stones filled with vinegar or salt water placed outside homes to disinfect coins during trade. A primitive form of quarantine, it showed early awareness of contagion, even if the science was missing. Historians still argue how much medieval people understood disease transmission or if their practices were mostly superstitious guesswork. Yet some remedies likely had real benefits, even if by accident. So, as you sip your bitter herbal tea, you realize surviving winter was as much about fighting unseen enemies as braving the cold itself. You tug your woolen cloak tighter, mindful of the layers beneath it and the centuries of superstition woven into each garment. Clothing in medieval times wasn't just practical, it was steeped in ritual and belief, especially when facing the brutal cold. For instance, many peasants believed that knitting your own hat would bring warmth, but only if you left a small hole undone. That missing stitch was thought to let good spirits in while keeping cold spirits out. Talk about a fashion statement. Washing wool was often avoided in winter, as many thought it sapped the fabric's warmth. Instead, clothes were aired near fires or on frosty mornings, sometimes for weeks. Smells were just part of life, and who had time for daily baths anyway? A quirky custom had folks wearing garments inside out during cold spells to confuse evil spirits believed to cause chills and illness. Not exactly runaway ready, but a clever psychological shield. Historians still argue how much these superstitions impacted actual survival versus providing comfort and a sense of control. Either way, these beliefs reveal how intertwined daily life was with the unseen world. So as you patch your cloak and adjust your hood, remember each thread is a stitch in the fabric of hope against winter's relentless chill. You step outside, the crisp air biting your cheeks as frost crunches underfoot. Winter doesn't mean retreat if there's work to be done. Gathering firewood, tending livestock, and even ice fishing become crucial tasks to keep your village alive. Wood gathering is a communal effort. Axes swing rhythmically as neighbors work side by side, cutting fallen branches and deadwood. The labor is grueling, muscles burning in cold air, but every bundle collected is warmth saved for a night ahead. You're careful not to overharvest, knowing wood scarcity can be deadly. Ice fishing adds a splash of danger to winter chores. You carefully chip holes in frozen rivers or lakes, lowering lines to catch fish trapped beneath thick ice. The cold water and slippery ice are hazards, but fresh fish are a prized winter delicacy. A quirky hack involves fingerless gloves or wool wraps, balancing warmth and dexterity for those working outdoors. Practical and clever, they show how peasants adapted to the freeze. Historians still debate how much work was done in the coldest months, as some argue for extended rest periods, others see winter labor as vital. So as you swing your axe and peer through frosted breath, you realize winter's grip was harsh, but life and work persisted. You sit beside a small clay stove, its modest warmth a precious gift in the biting cold. While castles boasted grand fireplaces, peasant homes made do with simple heating devices, primitive stoves, foot warmers, and bed warmers that stretched every bit of heat they could muster. Foot warmers, often wooden boxes filled with hot stones or embers, were passed from person to person, tucked under cloaks or blankets. The warmth was uneven and sometimes too hot in spots, but it offered a welcomed reprieve from frozen toad. Bed warmers were metal pans filled with hot coals, carefully wrapped in cloth and slid under bedding. They were a risky luxury, with tales of smoldering blankets, but the warmth was worth the danger on the coldest nights. In some northern villages, heated stones or bricks served as hand warmers, passed around during gatherings. Imagine a medieval hot potato game, but with warmth instead of embarrassment. Historians still argue how widespread these devices were and how accessible to the poorest peasants. Archaeological evidence is sparse, but written records hint at a blend of ingenuity and necessity driving these inventions. So as you cradle a warmed stone, feeling the gentle heat seep into your hands, you appreciate the small sparks of human creativity that brought warmth amid relentless winter. You hear the steady toll of the church bell, its deep notes cutting through the frosty morning air. The church wasn't just a place of worship during brutal winters, it was a hub of charity and community support. Monasteries and parish churches often provided food, firewood, and shelter to the poorest villagers, becoming lifelines when the cold threatened to claim more lives. Religious festivals like Christmas and Candlemas brought people together, offering warmth through shared rituals and celebrations. Candles flickered in drafty churches, symbolizing hope and divine protection against the darkness and chill. For many, faith was as vital a comfort as blankets or fires. Some peasants believed that hanging holy relics or blessing their homes with holy water could ward off winter spirits or illness, a blend of spiritual hope and superstition. Whether it worked or not, these practices strengthened community bonds and offered psychological warmth. Historians still debate how much practical aid the church provided versus its spiritual role, but it's clear that faith and charity combined to help peasants endure the harshest months. So as you step into the glow of the village church, you feel the mingling of hope, warmth, and community, the intangible flames that kept many alive through winter's cold. You gaze at the weathered stones and ancient earth of your village, wondering how well medieval peasants truly endured those brutal winters. The story isn't straightforward. Historians still debate the extent of their resilience and the harsh realities they faced. Archaeological digs reveal a patchwork of clues, sturdy homes with thick walls that hint at efforts to fight cold, alongside skeletal remains showing signs of malnutrition and respiratory disease. Some villages thrived with clever storage and preparation, while others suffered devastating losses during harsh winters. A fringe theory suggests peasants entered a mild hibernation-like state during winter to conserve energy, but this remains speculative. More accepted is the view that survival depended heavily on community support, preparation, and sometimes sheer luck. An odd find: frozen medieval boot prints preserved in peat bogs give us a glimpse into footwear and movement during icy months, a literal cold footprint in history. Historians still argue whether the popular image of hardy peasants captures the brutal truth or romanticizes it. What's certain is that winter shaped not just survival tactics but social structures and cultural practices. So as you trace those ancient paths through frost and history, you appreciate the complexity behind the simple question: how did they really make it through? You stand at the edge of the village, watching your breath mingle with the cold evening air as the sun sets behind frost-covered trees. The harsh lessons of medieval winters still ripple through time, influencing rural life and traditions long after the last thatch roof was laid. From layered clothing to communal hearths, many survival tactics shaped later cold weather customs. Some ancient methods, like smoking rooms to preserve meat or using natural insulation, have quietly resurfaced in modern sustainable living practices. Even today, community gatherings in winter echo those medieval bonds forged in frost. Interestingly, some medieval warmth hacks like sharing body heat or strategic layering are surprisingly relevant, reminding you that innovation often arises from necessity. Historians still debate how much our current resilience owes to these old lessons versus technology, but the human spirit's adaptability remains a constant. As you zip up your modern coat, you carry forward the warmth of centuries past, a testament to survival, ingenuity, and the enduring power of community through the coldest nights. Now, as darkness deepens and the chill softens around you, take a slow, deep breath. Feel the quiet warmth that envelops you, whether a blanket, a heater, or just the calm of your own space. Imagine the flickering glow of a distant hearth, the gentle murmur of voices shared in the dark, the steady heartbeat of life pressing back against winter's cold. The long, harsh winters of the past forged connections that warmed more than just bodies. In this stillness, let the stories of endurance, hope, and simple kindness wrap around you like a soft cloak. Your muscles relax, your breath slows, and the world grows gentle. Rest easy knowing that those who faced the darkest, coldest nights found ways to endure, and so will you. The frost may bite outside, but inside, warmth is a memory, a promise, and a quiet strength. Sweet dreams, and until next time. Hey guys, tonight we're going to dig through the dusty cabinets of ancient Roman bathrooms. You'll squeeze between marble walls, hear the splash of cold aqueduct-fed water, and smell the slightly unsettling combination of incense, oil, and vinegar in the air. Someone nearby is stirring a grayish-white paste in a bronze bowl, muttering about teeth that shine like polished bone. You look down, and yes, that paste smells interesting. Welcome to the bizarre, often questionable world of Roman toothpaste. And before you reach for your minty tube and whisper thank goodness, just remember, some of these ancient ingredients might include things like burnt animal bones, crushed oyster shells, or brace yourself aged human urine. You probably won't survive this in your morning routine, but it's a fascinating ride. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are. I love seeing how far we travel together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the entrance of a Domusa, a wealthy Roman townhouse on a sleepy street in Pompeii. It's early morning, and the air is crisp with a salty breeze from the nearby coast. Inside, the family is already up. There's bustling in the atrium, clinking of metal, and the low chatter of household slaves preparing hot water and scented oils. You wander through the triclinium, past a fading fresco of Bacchus holding a wine jug, and find yourself in the bathing chamber. This is where it all begins, the Roman hygiene ritual. It's not just a rinse-and-go affair. For elite Romans, personal grooming is a serious display of status, and teeth, though rarely shown in a wide smile, are expected to be clean, white, and, ideally, present. You watch as the master of the house reclines on a low bench while an attendant brings him a small bronze container filled with a chalky powder, crushed charcoal, perhaps, or maybe ground bones. A touch of vinegar is poured in, forming a gritty paste. He leans forward and, with a cloth-wrapped finger, smears the paste onto his teeth. There's no brushing in the modern sense. It's more of a polish, a firm rub, a slight wince, a rinse with cold water, and a hopeful grimace. This was considered dental care. The Romans didn't invent toothpaste, but they certainly made it their own, borrowing ideas from the Greeks and adding their own flair and funk. They developed recipes that blended the scientific with the superstitious. The goal? Whiter teeth, fresher breath, and maybe, just maybe, protection against decay. And not that they really understood bacteria. The wealthy could afford exotic ingredients, crushed oyster shells imported from Gaul, powdered deer antlers, resin from Arabian trees. The poor? They used whatever was around, ashes, charcoal, sometimes just a cloth and some vinegar. Everyone, though, believed in the ritual of cleansing the mouth as part of daily preparation for business, socializing, or seduction. Historians still argue whether Romans truly understood oral hygiene in a medical sense or if they were just mimicking the aesthetic use of the elite. One camp says the act was symbolic, like putting on a toga, a costume of health. Another suggests they observed cause and effect. When I scrub with charcoal, my teeth feel better. A third camp just laughs and points out how many skulls from Roman tombs show signs of serious tooth decay. Despite all of this effort. Quirky fact, the philosopher Seneca once wrote that you could judge a man's character by the smell of his breath. Let's just say, if your toothpaste smelled like vinegar and burnt hoof, you might want to carry a sprig of mint, too. As the morning light filters through the skylight above, you begin to appreciate the rhythm of Roman life. Slow, intentional, layered with habits passed down from Greek physicians, street gossip, and a touch of ancient marketing. After all, A glowing smile could win you favor in the forum or at least a second date at the amphitheater. And tomorrow, when someone tells you your toothpaste has whitening crystals, you might wonder if that's just modern oyster shell powder with a prettier name. You continue wandering through the villa, the marble floors cool beneath your feet, the faint scent of olive oil and lavender still lingering from earlier baths. Down a narrow hallway, you hear soft humming. It's another member of the household. At this time a young woman is seated before a bronze mirror, surrounded by small clay pots and carved wooden boxes. This is where you really see how seriously the Romans took their hygiene rituals. For them, cleanliness was both daily discipline and social necessity. From feet to fingertips to the space between your teeth, there was a product, a tool, or a slave whose job was to help you deal with it. You notice a curious set of items laid out before her. There's a bowl of pumice powder, a glass bottle of vinegar, and a cloth that's been twisted into a sort of scrubber. Her mouth opens slightly as she dabs the cloth into the mixture, and then delicately, methodically begins to rub it across her teeth. Not too hard, not too long, just enough to give that matte white look that Romans associated with a clean, desirable mouth. It wasn't just about removing food. The ritual had spiritual and aesthetic dimensions, too. Roman authors often spoke about purity of the body as reflecting purity of the soul. A clean mouth suggested discipline. A well-kept smile implied you were in control of your appetites. And, for the record, showing too many teeth when you smiled, that was considered a bit uncouth. Roman sculptors carved lips closed for a reason. And yet, behind all this carefully measured restraint, there was a strange passion for dental care, especially among the wealthy. They didn't just clean, they experimented. They shared recipes. They even debated the merits of particular mixtures, like today's arguments about fluoride or charcoal toothpaste. One popular Roman formula included a mix of ashes from burned goat hooves, salt, crushed oyster shells, and a splash of vinegar. The result was an abrasive, chalky paste with a sharp tang, good for whitening, perhaps terrible for enamel, probably. Historians still argue whether the repeated use of these abrasive materials led to faster tooth wear or if the real damage came from diet. Remember, Romans loved their dried fruits and honeyed wine. Then there were the breath fresheners. Before you panic about the toothpaste, just know they did try to keep their breath pleasant. The young woman you're watching pops a tiny clove into her mouth. Yes, the same kind you might use in mulled wine today. Other options included myrrh resin, parsley, and sometimes even frankincense chewed like gum. No Tic Tacs, but not terrible. The elite Romans, particularly women, also dabbled in dental cosmetics. Whitening was in vogue, and it wasn't just about cleanliness. A pale smile was seen as delicate and refined. Some ladies reportedly used powders made from crushed pearls, although whether that was actually effective or just a status flex remains, well, debatable. Here's a quirky tidbit. A few Roman poems refer to women who, embarrassed by missing or darkened teeth, would wear what were essentially early dentures or have their slaves craft thin slivers of ivory to insert temporarily. Think of it as the world's first Insta-smile. You listen to the woman humming as she finishes her routine. She spits into a small bowl, rinses her mouth, and dabs her lips with a cloth perfumed with rose water. Her teeth are clean, at least by the standards of the day, and her breath likely carries notes of cloves and vinegar. It's oddly calming, the way they turned even a potentially unpleasant task into a kind of ritual meditation. Clean, rinse, anoint, smile. There's something familiar about Ida echoes of your own morning routine, minus the goat hoof powder, of course. As she gathers her things, you catch a glimpse of her smile in the mirror. Not a wide grin, but a controlled, graceful lift of the lips. She's ready, not just for the street, but for society, for conversation, for judgment. The Romans may not have had modern dental knowledge, but they absolutely understood the social power of a well-kept face. Whether facing the Senate, the marketplace, or a lover in the garden, your hygiene was part of your message. And your message needed to be polished, sometimes literally. Tomorrow, when you pick up your toothbrush and glance in the mirror, maybe you'll think of this woman with her pumice and vinegar, humming her way to dignity. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be grateful that your toothpaste doesn't taste like foot ashes. You step outside the villa now, feet brushing soft volcanic dust as you make your way through the winding streets of Pompeii. The sun is rising higher, casting golden streaks across stone walls and mosaics. A cart rumbles by, and a vendor calls out his morning specials, mostly olives, dates, and flatbread. But just beyond him, tucked into a stall between a cloth merchant and a perfumer, is a sight that stops you cold: jars of white powder, bundles of herbs, and a sign that roughly translates to tooth remedies. For a brighter, bolder bite, you linger near the stall, watching an elderly Roman mana, his toga impeccably clean, his teeth a broken bar less so, negotiate with the vendor. He points to one of the jars. The vendor nods and proudly opens it, releasing a faint whiff of something earthy. The label: bone ash vinegar paste fortified. You probably wouldn't survive brushing your teeth with it, but the Romans, oh, they swore by it. Let's break this one down. Bone ash was exactly what it sounds like: the remains of burnt animal bones, usually cattle or sheep. The idea was that the calcium content would help strengthen your teeth and scrub away stains. Sounds scientific. Broken bar if you squint hard enough. It was often mixed with crushed oyster shells or egg shells, so both rich in minerals, but also wildly abrasive. And then came the vinegar, strong, sharp, acidic. Romans believed it had cleansing properties, possibly because of its astringent feel. In reality, it likely eroded enamel. But who's counting? Here's the real kicker. One of the more infamous ingredients in Roman dental pasta, at least among historians with a dark sense of humor, was powdered mouse skull. Yes, that's right, tiny skulls, dried and ground, supposedly enhanced whitening power and protected against toothaches. Why? Well, according to folk medicine, mice were thought to carry some kind of resiliency, perhaps because they could gnaw through anything. If they could destroy walls, maybe they could strengthen your bite. Logic. But the absolute showstopper of Roman toothpaste recipes? Human urine. Now, don't look away just yet. Let's be gentle. Aged urine, preferably Portuguese, because it had the right strength, was prized for its ammonia content. Ammonia, even today, is a powerful cleanser, and it does have some whitening capability. Romans would let urine sit in sealed jars until it fermented. Then, they'd mix it into pastes or use it straight as a rinse. Pliny the Elder, in all his wisdom, recommended it for tooth whitening and strengthening. You take a step back from the stall, suddenly very grateful for your mint-flavored gel back home. Quirky fact: there was a time in Rome when public urinals were taxed. Vespasian, the emperor, decided to make money off of the city's need to, well, go. Collectors would gather the liquid and sell it to tanneries and, yes, dental suppliers. It became such a common practice that when Vespasian's son Titus mocked the tax, the emperor supposedly held up a coin and said, "Does it smell?" When Titus said no, Vespasian replied, "Yet it comes from urine." Historians still argue whether Romans actually used the urine-based concoctions daily or whether they were reserved for specific ailments or elite rituals. Some believe it was more folk remedy than mainstream practice, while others suggest the smell became a symbol of toughness, like drinking apple cider vinegar today. Standing here, among jars of chalky powder and fermenting bottles, it's clear that Roman dental care was equal parts science, tradition, and sheer boldness. You wonder who was the first person to look at a mouse skull, a heap of ashes, and a jug of urine and think, yes, my smile needs this. And you ate a broken bar. You have to admire the dedication. Back in the stall, the vendor wraps up a small purchase for the elderly customer, just a pinch of ground bone with a sprig of mint. They exchange pleasantries, and the man smiles faintly, exposing a row of teeth stained from wine but worn smooth from years of scrubbing. He may not have minty freshness, but he has pride. And in ancient Rome, that counted for a lot. Tomorrow, when you squint at your toothpaste label and feel overwhelmed by the ingredients, take heart. At least it doesn't say mouse-derived. You follow that elderly Roman man through a side alley now, the sun beginning to warm the stone streets beneath your sandals. He hums softly, carrying his tiny packet of dental powder with care as if it were gold dust. But instead of returning home, he stops at a small square with a curious arrangement, a handful of ceramic